Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Nick here at NJ's Bricks, and today we're going to ask ourselves a bit of a weird question, which is, why does LEGO hate money? I've been thinking about this subject for a while, and I've made some previous videos that you've probably seen, and if you've been watching the shorts on my channel the last few days, you've definitely seen it. But the thing I've been rattling around inside of my head is, why is LEGO leaving so much on the table in regards to their licensed products, their intellectual property, things like Star Wars, Harry Potter, that they license to make sets out of? Some of the ways I feel that LEGO is underutilizing these properties, things like not filling in the gaps in the minifigure collections and the characters that are available from these IPs. As you can see from my recent shorts, there's so many characters missing from a ton of these major IPs that have been around now for, in some cases, 25 years of LEGO, and still they've yet to make some of these characters, but we have 87 different Luke Skywalkers or however many there are. And I think that they're seriously leaving a lot on the table when it comes to filling in the gaps of some of these missing minifigures. In addition to that, I think they're really losing a lot of luster by rehashing so many of the same sets over and over. Sets like Hagrid's Hut or the Night Bus or an X-Wing or what have you that are just made repeatedly, every few years, slightly updated or slightly different versions. Are they really getting the most bang for their buck by rehashing a lot of these core sets? And then the last thing is that I think they're really leaving a lot on the table when it comes to catering to high-end collectors. I think LEGO could really take a big page out of the book of trading cards and sports cards manufacturers in the way they do things like their CMF blind bag series. So we're going to dive a little deeper into a few of these topics and discuss some of the specifics of utilizing their IPs and expanding availability of certain aspects of their IPs that are really lacking. So the first thing that I've been thinking a lot about over the last couple of months is the limited number of CMF or collectible minifigure series. LEGO has such an extensive vault of IPs that they have collaborated with over the years or are actively collaborating with, and a ton of them just have tons of characters that are non-existent as minifigures, and sometimes it's for good reason. A lot of those characters end up not showing up because there's no kind of set that LEGO wants to make that makes sense to put them in. For instance, there's one Queen Amidala minifigure, and it showed up in kind of a weird set, the Gungan sub. That set honestly seemed like a bit of an excuse for them to release the Queen Amidala minifigure because they didn't have any other sets, to include her in, because she is limited on screen time, but is so recognizable that you really want to get that minifigure out there. So I think that there's a perfect way for them to fill in these gaps, and that's obviously with the collectible minifigure series. You don't have to come up with any kind of theme or set around the minifigure that makes sense for its inclusion. It is just existing on its own as a minifigure. So for instance, they have done a few licensed sets. They've done 2 Simpsons CMF series. It's been many years since we've seen one of those. They've only done 2 Disney CMF series, one in 2016 and one in 2019. How many Disney characters are there? How many variants of these Disney characters exist? They've only done 2 different Disney CMF. They've done 2 Potter CMF, that was in 2018, and the second one in 2020, so it's been 5 years since we've seen one of those. And they've done 2 Marvel CMF series, one of them in 2021 and one of them in 2023. So if you look at the dates that these are coming out, it does seem like they're trending a bit more in the direction of releasing more of these IP-related CMFs. Just as an example of some of the pretty major characters from some of these IPs that have never been made into a minifigure. In Potter, we have Rufus Scrimgeour, somehow not a minifigure, Mundungus Fletcher, Xenophilius Lovegood. These are characters that show up in multiple books. They show up on screen multiple times, still don't have minifigures. Up until the release of the Weasley House, the UCS Burrow that came out in 2024, we didn't even have Bill and Charlie Weasley, so you couldn't even get all the Weasleys. They've been making Harry Potter sets since 2001, and it took them 23 years to complete the Weasley family, which just seems completely egregious. In the Star Wars universe, no Galen Erso minifigure, despite, his relevance to the lore of all of Star Wars in general. No Cobb Vanth minifigure, fan favorite from The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1. No Boss Nass. Pretty interesting looking toyetic figure from The Phantom Menace that could easily be produced as some sort of big fig or something like the Leatherhead figure. There's tons more Star Wars characters, of course, but those are just a few of the bigger ones. And in the MCU, there's almost too many fairly critical characters to name that have never been made into minifigures, but no Zemo, no Jimmy Woo, no Arnim Zola. Those are all characters that show up in multiple properties. No Ego, Kurt Russell, missing out an Ego minifigure. What's up with that? No Odin, no Mobius minifigure, all the different Loki variants. There's dozens and dozens of characters from the MCU that are just begging for a minifigure that Marvel has yet to release. So I definitely think they need to expand their CMF offerings. And there actually was a leak recently that really prompted me to think a lot more about this and think that maybe LEGO is moving in a bit of a better direction in regards to catering to collectors and minifigures specifically. And that is this right here, leaked image of the Spider-Verse CMF that is supposed to be coming out later this year. This is exactly the type of product that I would tell LEGO to release. It ticks pretty much all the boxes that you would want to tick for the things that I'm talking about. So it's based on a hugely successful film series that itself is based on an IP that has decades and decades of fame behind it and millions of built-in fans, which is just Spider-Man in general. These films were also popular with adults and children, so that's hitting, both quadrants. Another thing is it contains many variants of a character, which is important because it makes it so that everyone has a chance to get their favorite. Like, I think most fans walked away from the Spider-Verse films with one or two favorite Spider-Man versions, so it gives them an opportunity to find their favorite characters when you put out one as a CMF series as extensive as this. But it also, is a really nice offering for completionists that want to have as many different Spider-Man variants as they can. The other thing that this CMF does is opens up possibilities in the minds of the fans. It shows that you're serious about expanding the variety of offerings that you're giving fans and the variety of minifigures that might potentially come out in the future. So they see something like a Spider-Verse CMF and they get excited that, hey, maybe they'll actually do a Lord of the Rings CMF at some point, and we can get some of those more niche characters that didn't really slot into any of the main sets. To segue from the CMF question, I think they could really take a page out of the book of trading card games and sports cards when it comes to their collectible offerings. I really think that there is a lot of room for LEGO to cater to high-end collectors more than they already do. They're really dropping the ball on this. They release these beautiful $400, $500, $600, $700 plus sets that are huge and contain a ton of parts and a lot of interesting features and high fidelity and a bunch of minifigures, but there's so many other ways that they could cater to collectors. When they put out the CMF series, they could introduce secret minifigures or maybe chrome version of minifigures or alternate print version of minifigures that would be more rare or harder to open than the regular 12 or 18 CMF that are included in that series. You could include chase figures, and that immediately right there creates a bigger demand for the CMF packs. I think would sell a lot more CMF if they decided to go this route. I think collectors would be really excited. When you introduce some of these high-end chase minifigures in the CMF series and things like that, you're also bringing down the cost of the average version for the average collector. Because if you release the CMFs at $5 a bag and there's some minifigures in there that are a lot more expensive, then that inherently has to bring down the cost of the other available minifigures to create an equilibrium. Otherwise, everyone would buy out all the CMF bags. If you're making enough CMF bags to meet demand, then the existence of high-end chase expensive minifigures brings down the cost of the rest of them. They've done Chrome C-3PO, and I think there was a Chrome Vader and a Chrome Stormtrooper. Those were exclusive type products you could only get at certain events, and those were all pretty popular, and I think they could stand to do more of that and include more of that in regular retail stores and places that are available to the average fan, because most fans can't make it to some of these exclusive events, and it's a huge barrier of entry to have things like Comic-Con exclusive minifigures. Now, I definitely think they should do stuff like that and have ultra exclusive minifigures that are hard to obtain and are expensive on the secondary market and, have some kind of allure history behind them. But I do think that they could expand their collectible offerings into more accessible places a lot more easily. Things like the GWP program, I think it's a great program, but they could do a better job of expanding it or having exclusive offerings at retailers like Target and Walmart that are more available. Not all fans want to order their product online to get the GWP. A lot of fans still get shut out from getting it because of the limited amount of them that are available, and I think it would be really cool if they could replicate this type of program at retail outlets. Now, I know it can be hard to get retail partners to get on board with this type of thing and to execute it the way you want it to be executed, but I do think it would be nice to offer those type of collectible things to early purchasers at regular retail outlets. That's one way that they could expand something like the GWP program to create more collectibles. A good example of a GWP that I thought was successful in multiple avenues was the Lars Homestead one from last year, which had the Amperu minifigure, which was a really interesting way for them to introduce a new minifigure that did not exist previously into our collections. And then one of the things that really has gotten me over the last few years is just the rehashing of the same sets repeatedly. So a couple of examples for you. 2025 is going to see the release of the fourth different version of the Night Bus. The last one was released in 2019, before that 2011, and before that 2004. The Night Bus hasn't even been seen on screen since 2004. Is it really so beloved that we need to keep updating it every 6 or 7 years? This also means we're going to see the release of the 4th different version of Stan Shunpike, and I've already mentioned the number of minifigures that don't even have one version. So is it really necessary for us to have 4 versions of Stan Shunpike? Probably not. We've yet to get a single version of characters like Scrimgeour or Mundungus Fletcher, so I think it's a little ridiculous. How many X-Wings have been rehashed over the years? If you search it up on Bricklink, you're going to get back 44 results just under sets. And, certainly some of those are like polybags and advent calendar micro builds and things like that. But there have been a lot of X-Wings and a lot of Luke Skywalker minifigures. Maybe take a break from doing that once and give us something unique like Luthen's Fonder Hallcraft of Mandor. All your fans that bought one of these X-Wing releases 15 or 20 years ago are now adults and, potentially have disposable income that they can spend on Lego sets, but that doesn't mean they just want to spend it on these exclusive, hundreds of dollars UCS sets. And even when they're doing that, you're releasing another Star Destroyer or another X-Wing. Fans are interested in unique things, and instead of just offering them expensive UCS sets to these collectors, why don't you try offering some cheaper sets that are introducing new minifigures into people's collections and creating some demand through their uniqueness? I think that would be a boon to adult collectors who are not necessarily just looking to buy these big expensive sets that are hard to display, but really want to get something unique instead of getting that, 11th X-Wing. If you go on Bricklink and you look up some other sets, Hagrid's Hut, 5 different versions. There's about half a dozen sets where Captain America is riding a motorcycle. Now, I understand, the sets sell well, I'm sure. That's why they keep revisiting them every so often, because the last one did well. Maybe the next one will too. But I think every once in a while, Lego might benefit from simply, in the case of the Night Bus, I think the one from 2019 looks better than the one coming out this year. So maybe just re-release that one from 2019 and spend that R&D money developing, something different, something that we haven't seen before. The last thing I really wanted to mention in regards to, why does Lego hate money? Why are they not selling some of these things? Why are they underutilizing their IPs? Why are they leaving so much meat on the table with these minifigures and with these different sets they could be putting out? Is the underutilization of some of their older themes or their smaller themes. Like, whatever happened to Stranger Things? Did their licensing language only include the option to put out one real set? The Upside Down came out in 2019, but in 2022, they released the Demogorgon and 11 Brickheads. So presumably, they could be releasing more Stranger Things sets. There's countless characters who have never gotten a minifigure, and many of them are from the latter 3 seasons, and the 5th season's already incoming. Are they ever going to do anything else with this license? Did they lose this license? Do they have no interest in renewing it? Like I said, there's a lot of demand for the only Stranger Things sets that exist from 2019. So presumably, at the very least, a Stranger Things CMF to show a lot of the new characters off would be, I think, wildly popular. I don't understand why they're doing nothing with these themes. I also think they're underusing Lord of the Rings. I know they really haven't been releasing new content on screen as of late, but as we mentioned previously, that hasn't stopped Lego from releasing, the 4th Night Bus, so on and so forth. So I really think they could be doing some more with the Lord of the Rings IP. Understandably, they focus some of their recent releases on these big and extravagant UCS sets, and that does go in line with, my thought process of like, your fans from 15 years ago are now adults that have disposable income to buy sets like this, and there's not really ever been Lord of the Rings content that was produced specifically for a younger audience, so I get targeting the older audience, but also mentioned previously, this audience might want to buy some smaller sets that are introducing new minifigures or new versions of these minifigures and are easier to display and, cheaper to acquire some of these minifigs. It's really hard to show off some of these giant UCS sets unless you have a ton of space, and not all of us do. I think there's a few other older themes that really could benefit from being revisited, either due to, enduring fan interest or new building techniques or new Lego molds that are available. The first one is SpongeBob specifically. Like, I know maybe the new episodes or things that are released aren't as popular as they used to be, but SpongeBob itself has clearly endured. The memes, the associated content that has come out with SpongeBob over the last 25 years is, I think it's almost just as popular as ever. And it's been so long since they released those sets. I think they really could revisit SpongeBob and find some interesting things there. If nothing else, the CMF series of SpongeBob would sell well. I mean, they did 2 Simpsons CMF series. So if that did well enough to sell a second series, I think something like SpongeBob, is not going to do as well as the Simpsons, but is going to do well enough to merit being made. And then the last thing I would really like to see them revisit is Pirates of the Caribbean, and most specifically the ships. It's been, since 2011 was the Black Pearl, I think, and, similarly, Queen Anne's Revenge around the same time or maybe a little later than that, but the shipbuilding techniques that have evolved in LEGO over the last 15 years are incredible. If you look at a newer set like the Endurance, I mean, the fidelity on this thing is incredible, and I really think LEGO would benefit from releasing a second version of the Black Pearl and a second version of Queen Anne's Revenge, as opposed to like the fourth version of the Night Bus. That's definitely another IP that I would really like to see them revisit. So all in all, I really just think there's so much meat being left on the bone here for LEGO. There's so many more interesting things they could be doing with these IPs, but they really just seem content to just keep streaming out these like $40 to $100 sets that are very frequently just rehashes of old sets that have higher piece counts and higher fidelity and higher prices, but are a lot of the times like smaller and sometimes less impressive looking. I really think they could be expanding their offerings in the CMF field. I think they could be expanding their offerings in like the high-end collectible, more exclusive minifigures, things that are harder to obtain for your high-end collectors. So that's an area that I really think LEGO could be doing. And then just introducing new concepts. I mean, these themes are really, really deep. There's a lot going on there. And to see them continue to rehash things like the Night Bus, Hagrid's Hut, the X-Wings, Cap riding his motorcycle, it gets a little stale. And I do understand that they are introducing new, younger audiences to these sets and these things that have proven to sell well in the past. I'm sure I don't have access to their numbers, but why would you release a 15th X-Wing unless the other 14 of them did pretty well? So I understand, but as a collector and someone who wants to see more unique offerings from LEGO, I think they're leaving a ton on the table when it comes to these IPs, and I definitely think they could be doing more. Go ahead and let me know down below, what types of things would you like to see them do in expanding their IPs? Do you want to see new IPs brought into the fold? Are there existing IPs that you want to see them do something new or different with? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.